Hello, everyone. I'm Angelina Lippert, the Chief Curator of Poster House in New York City, and that is the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of the poster. And today, I'm going to give you a tour of a recent exhibition I did. It was called the Utopian Avant-Garde Soviet Film Posters of the 1920s. I'm a fairly casual tour guide, so at the end, you'll be able to ask all the questions you want, and they can be any questions at all. Now, to give you some full disclosure, I actually did my dissertation on this exact collection that we had at the museum. At the time, it was known as the Susan Pack Collection, and I focused on Soviet posters for imported films in my dissertation. But this show is a bit more expansive, and it includes posters for domestic cinema. And now the collection belongs to a man named Ralph DeLuca, and he is one of the foremost experts on film poster history in the world. So this show is broken down into essentially three sections. So how film functioned in Russia at the turn of the century, how the Soviet film industry worked, and how the designers created these incredible posters. Now, that first section doesn't really have any corresponding images in the show, but it's important to know how Russia used cinema before the revolution. So I'll be showing images that don't necessarily line up timeline-wise with what I'm talking about at the beginning, just so you have something attractive to look at. That's not me. All right, here we go with the first slide. So right now you're looking at the Stenberg Brothers 1928 poster for Six Girls Seeking Shelter. It's one of my favorite posters in the show. But in order to understand how we get a poster like this, you need to know how film was viewed in Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution. So Russia embraced the potential of film earlier than pretty much any other country. 5 months after the Lumiere brothers screened their first films in Paris in 1895, they sent a cameraman to St. Petersburg and Moscow to demonstrate this new marvel as part of the celebrations surrounding the coronation of Tsar Nicholas II. So they filmed the royal family and its entourage throughout the day, creating this 93-minute feature, which became the first documentary recording a historic event. And the Tsar was so impressed with this result that he encouraged the importation of technical supplies from France, which is where most of the basic components of filmmaking were made. And he initiated something called the Tsarist Chronicle, which was a short newsreel series that ran until 1917, so like 2 decades. And this was intended to publicly present and promote the activities of the imperial court. So soon, major production studios from France, like Pathé and Gaumont, they set up offices in Moscow to make and distribute films. Now, this poster is for In the Gardens of Avara. It's a 1926 poster by an unknown artist. Again, this is from a much later time period than what I'm talking about, but I wanted you to have nice visuals. So the outbreak of World War I in 1914 kind of set the stage for the future of the Russian movie industry. Essential materials like celluloid film and equipment became nearly impossible to obtain, and imported movies, while they weren't banned, were hard to find as supply chains were cut off by the Eastern Front. Now, without competition for foreign films, domestic production became pretty much the only means of satisfying this growing demand for cinema in Russia. And the style of the movies that were being produced also changed drastically during this time period, evolving from like a series of 4 or 5 shorts with newsreels interspersed in between to these more formulaic feature-length films. And the posters promoting these movies didn't look like what you're looking at now. They looked similar to the ones created in Europe, the ones that we all know about. They weren't wild graphics that you're going to see later. Instead, they basically showed like the main character in some dramatic moment in the film, really similar to how we advertise movies today. And the spaces used to screen these films also changed in Russia at this time, moving beyond these like gutted out apartment buildings that were just like rows of chairs to turn into these more lavish movie palaces that had things like buffets, plush seating, reading rooms, and improved ventilation. Now, this poster, again, much later than what I'm talking about, is for the Green Alley. It's from 1929. It's by Nicholas Prusakov. It's still a decade later than where I'm talking about right now. The urban public's relationship with cinema shifted dramatically after the revolution, so that by late 1918, the Bolshevik government under Lenin nationalized the film industry. Theaters were now entirely state-owned. All screened content had to be deemed educational, and it was illegal to sell raw celluloid to private companies. Within a matter of months, though, the film industry imploded along with the country's financial system. So that in 1921, facing mass famine, a power and heating shortage, and extreme inflation, Lenin determined that the only way forward was to rebuild the Russian economy by allowing some domestic private enterprise. And in March of that year, he established the new economic policy that allowed a modicum of free trade, including the reopening of movie theaters in Moscow and other cities. While some theaters continued to be state-owned at this time, the majority were either privately run or leased from the government, allowing for really savvy entrepreneurs to capitalize on the public's hunger for entertainment. This also created a bit of a new social class of small business owners. So to get people to go to these theaters, posters, more than any other medium, were determined to be the most effective way to entice an audience. This is Mikhail Dluglak's 1928 design for Wandering Stars. Also, forgive my pronunciation of Russian names. I can read it, but I can't pronounce it. Now, from the Soviet government's perspective, the ideal film fulfilled three metrics. So one, it was educational and promoted party politics. Two, it was artistic and glorified Russian modernity. And three, it made money. No movie ever met all three of these goals. Now, despite the fact that the Bolshevik Party saw more potential in the power of film as propaganda than any other government, it failed to accept that in reality, people, particularly the urban poor, just want to be entertained. Now, to work around this, popular imported films were often bookended by these like live political speeches or recorded communist shorts known as agitprop, agitational propaganda. And posters like this one would lure an audience into cinemas with the promise of pure entertainment. But when they got there, they'd be force-fed like re-education or propaganda on the side. The other benefit of allowing unsanctioned movies to be shown was purely financial. Citizens were more likely to spend money on lowbrow comedies, westerns, and romances than on more acceptable content. And that income, in turn, went to fund the domestic film industry that produced more propaganda. Now, the government collected taxes on ticket sales as well as rental fees from distributors, and they funneled all of those profits directly into the creation of that new propaganda, too. This is, again, one of my favorites in the show. This is Nikolai Prussakov's 1929 poster for Man of Fire. If any of you guys know the work of Klutzis, very famous, slightly later poster designer, I make a point that I think this poster influenced him greatly. Now, staunch members of the Bolshevik Party continued to criticize the very bourgeois elements of Western film. The state cinema enterprise known as Goskino was set up in 1922. It was later renamed Sovkino in 1926, in case that sounds more familiar. And it began censoring imported films. So films that were already being released in Russia usually took 1 to 5 years from their original debut in their country of origin, which allowed the state like ample time to insert alternative intertitles. And the intertitles are like the text card in a silent film, the text that appears in between each scene. So they would have dialogue or like an explanation of what's happening. Well, the government could now insert whatever message they wanted. It didn't have to be the original plot points. They could also re-edit the order of the scenes, so change the name of the movie to something more aligned with a communist viewpoint. And because of this, many of the foreign films screened in Russia during the 1920s bore little resemblance to their original releases. The posters also rarely reflected the actual content of the films, with multiple artists creating different designs for a single movie that situated the plot in a disparate range of existing genres. So, for example, here we have two posters for the film The Great Tragedy of a Small Woman, released in 1929. The image on the left, also by Prussakov, and the one on the right is by Georgy and Vladimir Stenberg. Now, the one by the Stenberg brothers, it's stark, it's dramatic, it's intense, while Prussakov's is very playful. It could be a comedy, like a romantic comedy. And you see that they're being directed to promote the film in a number of ways so that you would get the widest audience possible. You get people who want to go see a drama, and you get people who want to go see a comedy. It's not really either of those things. Also, random fun fact, if I toggle between the poster on the left, so you see Prusakov's on the left, the hat, and I go back to Man of Fire, it's the same hat. He copied his own artwork and inserted it into 2 posters to save time. I think always thinks that's really cool. Anyway, this is the Stenberg brothers working with Yakov Ruklevsky in 1927 for another film. And I'm showing this to focus on the domestic film industry rather than films that were imported. So Soviet-made films embraced the vast potential of cinema to celebrate the progressive modernity of Soviet Russia. As the demand for film exceeded production capacity, newsreel footage kind of became the essential filler for every theater, with many minor events, like really minor events, being turned into these full-length documentaries. So almost anything of note, from like a factory opening to a seasonal festival, it found its way into Soviet cinema. And it was always accompanied by a dramatic, dynamic poster. Now, this documentary was filmed on location in Uzbekistan with local Chuvash actors, and it followed the women of this like Turkic ethnic group during a period before the revolution. And the purpose of a film like this was to link the revolutionary cause with colonized or otherwise oppressed peoples, so underscoring that communism could only ameliorate their lives and make their lives better. Also, this is the time that major directors like Dzinga Vertov and Sergei Eisenstein emerged, bringing this new type of artistic vision to the medium that would solidify Russia's reputation as the premier producer of avant-garde, cutting-edge films. Now, this poster is by Alexander Rodchenko for Vertov's 1924 film, Film Eye or Kinoglas. These directors pushed the boundaries of what cinema could be and could do. It incorporated extreme close-ups, unusual angles, and the particularly Soviet innovation of montage, all of which were reflected in the corresponding posters. So this is the poster that actually opened the exhibition, since it's the earliest in the collection. I also want to point out that this show in the United States, it was the first time that all 4 of Rodchenko's posters were on view in the same room in the United States, which was like a big deal for us. But back to this poster. This movie was actually meant to be the first in an unrealized 6-part series that showcased Vertov's novel approach to documentary filmmaking. Now, through the use of hidden cameras, Vertov and his team captured these like slice of life, everyday events in Soviet Russia. He then deployed a full range of modern film techniques to edit and reconstitute the footage, including animation, multiple exposures, these like high-speed shots, reverse motion, and everyone's favorite, montage. And the title of the movie really harkens back to Vertov's earlier career as a journalist within the newsreel department of the Moscow Cinema Committee. This film is seen as that bridge between straight reporting and his theory that the editor creates a truth beyond the narrative perception of reality. So this concept, as well as the method itself, are referred to as Kinoglas film. So the title of the film, Film Eye. So it's like a very meta and broadly interpreted title. So I also want to point out that the things you see here, the boy's head, the camera, that's not actual photo montage. Printing limitations in the Soviet Union at this time meant that you could rarely reproduce photography at scale in a poster. That comes a little bit later. Instead, both the central eye and that double portrait of the boy and the camera, that's all drawn in a very photorealistic style, which I'll talk more about later. So now that I've pretty much covered how cinema functioned in the Soviet Union, I'm going to switch gears and focus on the artists and a lot of individual posters in the show. So right now you're looking at the great 1929 poster by Belsky for 5 minutes. Again, I'm going to be setting the stage about 10 years earlier than the poster, just so you know where these are coming from. So in November 1917, the government established the People's Commissariat of Enlightenment, also known as Nakomprost, unifying art and education under the singular leadership and establishing their equal importance in the creation of propaganda. So like art and education, both important to creating propaganda. This organization oversaw censorship, taxation, and advertising within the film industry, and was one of the few government agencies to support the enthusiastic young artists of the avant-garde, typically commissioning poster designers from backgrounds outside of the graphic arts. In fact, many of the most prolific and notable poster artists, particularly ones in this show, like the Stenberg brothers and Rodchenko, they were trained architects and engineers who approached the concept of the poster from like a very three-dimensional perspective. They drew on the progressive theories of constructivism, suprematism, and productivism. Now, these isms, they're all very similar and very difficult to explain. We thought about doing like a handout in the show to kind of like break down what the differences are between those three concepts, but it made even less sense when I tried to write it down. So just say that like essentially all of these genres within art were created by these guys while they were all students together at major state art schools. And if you know anything about like a bunch of bros in school, most of the manifestos and theories they come up with are like masturbatory bullshit, made to make themselves sound smarter. So in this case, though, that bullshit helped forge a new graphic language. And you can see evidence of all three of these styles in the posters. Now, Soviet cinematic innovations like montage, extreme use of scale, and these like jarring angles were also reflected in the poster designs themselves, linking them to like the overall experience of watching one of these movies. And some of these artists even attempted to suggest the motion of film by adding multiple panels of the same figure in slightly varying poses, like you see here. The Stenberg brothers in this 1926 poster for the 3 Million trial. They create repetition with slight variation among the three separate panels on either side of the page. And while the guy on the left, it's very subtle, the one on the right, it's like he's waving. So they've created this successive movement by applying like the progression of a film reel. So they're taking a static medium and making it kinetic, and that's like nobody was doing that. Now, another stylistic element that became pretty commonplace at this time was that typographic credit lines naming actors and directors became part of the designs, while bold, bizarre colors reflected the influence of abstract art. Now, these posters are the opposite of the typically like saccharine Hollywood designs that you would see in the West. This is not like the poster for Gone with the Wind. This is focusing not on the stars in the film, but rather capitalizing on the visual tension, the distortion, even like the feeling of anxiety to sell a movie. You're looking at Prusakov and Borisov's joint 1926 poster for The Unwilling Twin. This one's awesome. One cool thing is that you can kind of see toward the back of their head the back of the poster coming through. So it was a poster that was used on both sides. It was just never put on the wall. So there was a paper shortage. So they reprinted on the other side. Now, another really big thing to keep in mind is that all of these designers, they're incredibly young. Many of the more established artists left Russia during the Civil War, leading to a large cultural hole that needed to be filled by a younger generation. And that generation were these idealistic, passionate, mostly men, and with a strong belief that they were responsible for building this new communist world. And they saw art as a means of improving society. Now, in the aftermath of the revolution, these same student artists filled the streets of major cities with these vividly colored celebratory posters and banners, all referencing the visual language of the avant-garde. So constructivism and similar movements, they became this accepted part of the architecture of the modern Soviet city and were understood by like the average citizen as signifiers of the new communist state. So the incorporation of elements of these styles into film posters just reinforced film's role as an extension of state propaganda. So these posters aren't just pretty, and for a while they're part of maintaining a sense of the revolution. This is my absolute favorite poster in the show. Cement. It's from 1928. It's by the Stenberg brothers. Now, as the title would imply, this Ukrainian film focuses on the struggles of workers in a cement factory after the revolution. Now, graphically, the use of flat color and geometry to import emotion within the composition suggests the strong influence of suprematism, if we're going to talk about any of those art movements, on this piece. Now, I get a lot of questions about production and printing these posters at the time, and it was absolutely no easy feat. So during this period, lithographic presses in Russia, they all predate World War I, and were often noted as being like held together by string or otherwise falling apart. The inks that were available in Russia, they lacked vibrancy, and the paper quality was also really, really poor and in short supply. Now, while some designers were able to use photo montage in their image, very few. Rudimentary Soviet presses were generally not able to replicate photography that big. And these restrictions led to this extreme creativity that you've seen so far, including the invention of this type of drawn photorealism that relied on you would project a film still onto paper on a wall, and then you would trace an actor's features. And the Stenbergs are often credited with kind of inventing or at least pushing this process to the forefront. In the show, we had this great little 3-minute video explaining the process, but I'll just explain it here. Also, just to keep in mind, the turnaround time for these designs was remarkably quick. A designer may have seen a film one afternoon only to have the completed poster by the next morning. And in many cases, the artists never even viewed the movie, but instead they relied on like a press kit, a summary, or even just like a few publicity stills to create the poster. And this is why so many of the posters that you're going to look at and that you've seen so far, they have no relationship with the actual content of the films. So the results are these wildly novel images printed in runs of between like 8,000 or 20,000 copies, and most of which were pasted on walls and destroyed by rain and weather. And so they would die within like a week. So the shelf life of these are very short, and it's a miracle that any of the ones we have survive. Incidentally, no poster that survives today was ever actually on a wall. It would have been an overrun, one that somebody forgot in a drawer. Posters that were on the wall would have been destroyed. I love this 1927 Stenberg Brothers poster for the Pounded Cutlet. And when I was giving tours, I would always use this to emphasize the discrepancy between the visual presentation and the actual content of the film. Now, I've seen this film. This film is all of 20 minutes long, and it's from the United States, and it was originally released under the title The Yokel in 1926, so a year before it came to the Soviet Union. And it's a slapstick comedy about like this country bumpkin who inherits an oil well and goes to the big city with his pet goose. And once there, he like escapes all these women who want his money, and he runs off with the maid in a fancy house. And guess what's not in the film? Boxers. There are no boxers are in this movie. And what the Stenbergs did get right are the images of the lead actors. So in the upper left, that's Snub Pollard. He was a famous silent film actor. And down the lower right, that's Thelma Daniels. But there are no boxers in this film. None. So this is presumably an example of the designers inferring a theme from the movie's title. Obviously, the title, The Yokel, that doesn't translate into Russian. So the censorship bureau decided to change the title to The Pounded Cutlet. We don't know why they decided to change the title. Obviously the Stenberg brothers read, they were like, Pounded Cutlet, pounded, maybe it's a boxing film. So that's why they inserted this. And also in many of these movies, the order of the intertitle cards of the narrative, like I said before, so like they would mix up the order of the scenes. So instead of like boy meets girl, it becomes like boy meets tractor saves the collective. Now, I actually want to focus on the stories of a few individual posters in the show. And I'm starting with this comparison between the two posters for The Death Ray from 1925. The one on the right is the very famous one. It's by Rodchenko. And the one on the left is by Anton Levinsky. Now, you immediately see that they are very different ads. But they share the motif of the four like L shapes. Now let's start with Rodchenko's poster. The image was only recently determined to be a work by him. And as I mentioned earlier, multiple advertisements were commonly created for a single movie, often with comparable print runs. So like if 6,000 copies were made of one, 6,000 were printed of the other. In this case, 7,000 copies were made of the Levinsky one. And as Rodchenko was one of the founders of the constructivist movement, it's no surprise that his poster deploys this like very strong contrasting colors, simple geometric shapes of that style to produce a very visceral response rather than like a narrative summary of the plot. And the sole figurative element in Rodchenko's composition has like aviation goggles on, very like a minimalist head. And if you had seen the exhibition in person, we actually had a film still on the opposite wall of the character that represents, was like the villain in the movie. Meanwhile, I love the box in the lower left because it presents this like unique marketing challenge. I guess I don't actually need to translate it for you, but for anyone out there who doesn't read Russian, it essentially says that if you solve before the first screening, whoever solves the mystery of the signs in this poster will get free entry into the death ray. Now, while not yet the dominant political party in Germany, the Nazis had officially adopted the swastika as their symbol in 1920. And as the bad guys in the movie were repeatedly referred to as fascists, the intended connection between them and the Nazis is pretty clear. And if you rotate those four glyphs, it becomes a swastika. So that's what people had to guess. Now, Levinsky's poster, that's the one on the left, for the film is actually one of the earliest cinematic posters to incorporate photo montage. So those images of the guy with the death gun and the woman with the other gun, those are actual photographs that have been incorporated as photo montage. Now, to do this, the designer would cut out imagery from printed photographs at the appropriate scale and kind of insert them into the larger graphic image. The composition would then be photographed and kind of reprinted through photo offset lithography. Now, not every press could do this. This requires a much more advanced printing press than many of these posters were made with, which is why photo montage is pretty rare in these posters until later into the 30s. Now, obviously, we can't get through this lecture without talking about the most famous movie in the show, Battleship Potemkin. So this is Rodchenko's 1925 poster for the movie, directed by Sergei Eisenstein. And in case you haven't seen it, it chronicles the real-life mutiny in 1905 of Russian sailors aboard a ship off the coast of Odessa. Now, many of the plot points are fictionalized to enhance a very pro-communist message about how this act of rebellion was the first step toward the Bolshevik Revolution. And there are at least 4 other different posters were created for the release of this film, including one by the Stenberg brothers and another by Levinsky. And each presents like this very different take on the movie, as like similar to what we just saw with the Death Ray. But I think Rodchenko's constructivist composition is graphically the strongest of the posters that were produced, with like the diamond shape around the ship's gun turrets creating this like 3-dimensional kind of trompe-l'oeil effect where it's like receding and emerging at the same time from the page. And the text surrounding the diamond announces, "Coming soon to the best theaters in Moscow." This was also the first Soviet film to be commercially successful abroad. However, it is important to note that popular Western-style cinema was still 10 times more profitable within Russia than those made by domestic directors like Vertov or Eisenstein. So unlike ballet or theater that had like historically reflected the latest tastes of the cultural elite, cinema was the preferred cultural activity of the working class, and therefore the most successful films were those that presented easily digestible entertainment. This is the 4th and final poster by Rodchenko in the show, and I clearly had to share all 4 because they're like the most important. And this is for the 1926 film 1/6 of the World, in which was commissioned by the Soviet government as a pure propaganda film intended to showcase like the diverse riches within communist countries, indicated by the title, like 1/6 of the world is now communist. And Rodchenko's ingenious composition shows this photo montage head of a woman staring out the viewer, while 1/6 of the black upper layer of the image appears to have been pulled back, revealing a second layer in red, the color of the communist flag. And the design tempts the viewer to continue like pulling down the black upper layer, thus figuratively wanting to turn the entire world red or communist in this case. And the film was directed by Dzinga Vertov, who enlisted a group of 8 teams to travel throughout the Soviet Union and film like happy, productive lives of its citizens. The end result is less avant-garde than his other films because it was like very much serving politically as like this visual tapestry of the Soviet Union's prosperity and natural resources. I also want to take a brief moment to look at this 1926 film For the Punishment by Nikolai Prusakov and Grigory Borisov. This poster advertises the 4th in a series of 5 Georgian adventure films about a small gang of like unlikely heroes and their various exploits in the 1st Cavalry Army. But wait, what makes this poster historically interesting is its depiction of Kador Ben Salim, who is pretty much the only known black actor in Soviet cinema in the 1920s. He's from Senegal. He came to Russia with a Moroccan circus troupe. He then joined the Red Army during the revolution, fought for the Red Army, and then he became an actor after the revolution, and he appeared in at least 8 films. and he uses like acrobatic skills in the story. So he's like the Vin Diesel, Fast and the Furious. That's what this type of movie is. We also should take a look at these two posters they're for different films. On the left is Semyonov's 1927 poster for The Girl with the Hat Box, while on the right is Nikolai Prusakov's 1929 poster for Mounted on Colt. Now, these are entirely different types of movies that are using the same method to sell the film to viewers. So in The Girl with the Hat Box, he does not depict a scene from the film, but rather shows this like bodiless figure against a giant question mark. And then it says like, where is the person? The answer being that he's gone to see Girl with a Hat Box. Meanwhile, in the other one, the tagline reads, everyone's straining to see Mounted on Colt. So you don't know anything more about the film by looking at these posters. It's just enticing you with like temptation, like anticipation, like where are they looking? Where are they going? Oh, it's so cool to go do this, without providing much information because the designers had no information on these films. Now here we have the Stenberg brothers 1928 poster for Shanghai Document, one of the posters with the highest printing circulation in the exhibition. There were like 20,000 copies of this poster printed. And the film itself was funded by Prometheus, which is a German distribution company that promoted Soviet film abroad. And it's a 6-reel documentary about Chinese life in the late 1920s. It's considered one of the greatest examples of Soviet nonfiction film. Now, the original focus of the movie was supposed to be the economic disparity between the domestic and foreign elite in China, and the thousands of like impoverished laborers within the major cities. But the production crew happened to be in Shanghai during the Shanghai Massacre of 1927. So that's when Chiang Kai-shek, he ordered the extermination of all the communists in the city, resulting in this like major blow to Soviet influence within China. And the film just happened to be filming at the time when this massacre happened. So they get like actual bloody scenes. They get the real violence. They get this like amazing propaganda moment, and they use it. And this is one of like a seriously important propaganda film at that time. Now, another really interesting poster to look at is this 1928 design by Prusakov and Borisov for the Soviet Georgian film, The Law of the Mountains. Now, the story follows these like two best friends in a 19th century mountain town, and one of them like accidentally causes the death of the other guy's brother in like a workplace accident. And while the brother like forgives him, yeah, no problem, buddy. The town demands revenge, and so they have to like fight to the death. But what I like to point out in this poster is the different types of printing that are present here. So you have photo montage in those two small squares of the men's faces, and that's probably an acid etched, like the way you would print a photograph in a newspaper. Then you have the drawn photos or the drawn portraits of the men below there. The large type is wood type, the small type is metal type, and the colors in the background is zinc lithography. So you have like so many different printing methods in a single poster, plus for every color that's a different run through the press. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 passes through the press to create the one poster. And you would have to do that however many thousand times you're making copies. So you like if 1,000 posters were printed, it actually went through the press 6,000 times. So it's like I hope that blew your mind, because it blew my mind. Now this 1929 poster is by the Stenberg brothers, is for the documentary In Spring. We used it in a lot of PR images because it's just a beautiful image. Now, to properly explain like the concept of this film, I have to go back to 1927. That's when Stalin announced the first 5-year plan, which was this very ambitious approach to rapid economic growth within the Soviet Union that focused on heavy industry and the collectivization of agriculture. And its implementation undid many of the systems put into place under Lenin's new economic policy, which went into effect in 1922. Now, this film was shot in Ukraine by Mikhail Kaufman, which is Zinga Vertov's brother, actually. And it's this blatant piece of propaganda showcasing the benefits of the first 5-year plan. It's also like the most boring film I've ever seen. You literally watch snow melt for 20 minutes. And then you go through a factory and then there's like a dance. But the one thing to keep in mind is that while this film is promoting like the benefits of the first 5-year plan, in reality, the first 5-year plan led to a significant shortage of consumer goods as well as to like mass famine. So there's a lot of false advertising taking place in these types of films. This 1929 poster for Turksib by Semyonov is one of the most important pieces in the show. It was about the completion of the Turkestan-Siberian Railroad, often abbreviation to Turksib. And the documentary dramatizes the final days of that railroad's construction, with workers shown like rushing to finish the railway on time. And many Soviet films at this time like stress the positive impact of communism on its more remote citizens, especially those in Central Asia. And movies like this were as much educational propaganda for the state as they were a means of like demonstrating the universal prosperity and modernization provided by the central government. In reality, though, like I mentioned before, not completing this project on time would have resulted in extraordinarily harsh punishment or death for those involved. So the positive film is masking a very brutal reality. Now, this type of delusional propaganda is also seen in this 1930 poster by Yakov Ruklevsky for Giant to the Virgin Soil. It was directed by Lydia Stepanova, so we have a woman. This film was a documentary that celebrated the triumphs of modern agricultural practices through mechanized farming, so through tractors. And the promotion of these themes to the masses was of like the utmost importance to Stalin's first 5-year plan, because it partially focused on the establishment of collective farms. And this tractor became the symbol of modernity in Russia, even though the reality was that like almost 90% of Stalin's collective farms lacked tractors. Many farmers pushed back against collectivization. They withhold their grain supplies. They killed their livestock in protest. And then there were these very unrealistic quotas that were placed on the farmers. Like quotas they could never meet even if they had a tractor. And so this enforced collectivization resulted in mass famine throughout the Soviet Union in the early 1930s and the deaths of millions of people. And yet the film makes it look really lovely. It's also important to keep in mind that after Stalin instituted the first 5-year plan in 1927, the Soviet Union fell into this period of cultural upheaval with these new ever-changing regulations going into effect almost daily. So in 1930, Soyuz Kino was founded, and that's kind of centralized all decisions about cinema, from production to distribution, under one single government entity. And foreign films became harder to import now. And then eventually they were banned altogether in 1931. And without having to compete against the popular foreign films, the quality of domestic cinema kind of deteriorated significantly now. And then in 1935, Stalin put this like movies to the millions mandate, which basically meant no individual artistic expression. You could not make anything experimental because it was too hard to understand. It all had to be kind of like the implementation of Soviet realism. So like happy peasants looking great, doing fun stuff, nothing dramatic, nothing controversial, nothing hard to understand, nothing subtle. So yeah, that was happening now. Now, let me see. Just because I don't want to go over time, I'm going to say that, yeah, that'll be the last poster I show. So while design historians, like myself, while we celebrate the incredible posters in this exhibition, it's very important to remember that they were produced during this time of extreme social upheaval and terror in the Soviet Union, and millions of people died during this time, and many were stripped of their property, separated from their families. And a lot of the designers, when socialist realism came to be the mandated form of artistic expression, like Vladimir Stenberg claimed till he died that the government killed his brother. We don't know. A lot of the artists disappeared, and a lot of them had to change their styles completely to fit within the new mandate of socialist realism. So just that's to keep in mind that while these posters are considered the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest graphic design achievement of all time, there's also this like very dark side to them as well. And with that, like I will absolutely open the room up to questions, whatever you want. Oh, hi. Oh, why is Six Girls Seeking Shelter my favorite? Going back, so everyone knows what I'm talking about. I just think it's beautiful. This one, if it's very interesting in the United States, actually in England as well. A lot of like punk rock designers of the 70s and 80s. They used a lot of these Soviet um, motifs in like their posters or album covers. So like this image was used on a Pink Martini album, but with a cabaret singer in place of the Six Girls. So it's riffed upon a lot. Also, Leonardo DiCaprio owns a copy of this poster, which I think is kind of hot. But no, I just always loved it. I think it's a beautiful piece, and if I could buy a poster in the show, this would be one of the two I'd buy. So that's why. Oh, because there are two reasons. Why did I decide to pursue a degree in the art of the Russian avant-garde? Well, um, first and foremost, when I was going into graduate school, the Russian art market was the largest and fastest growing in the world. So for purely economic reasons, I was like, well, Sotheby's is going to need a Russian expert. And then when I graduated, the art market collapsed. So that was not a waste of time, but it didn't end the way I wanted to be. My undergraduate focuses on German art, so I'm really German and Russian art are like near and dear to my heart. Although now I focus primarily on French posters, because that's where the majority of poster collecting culture, like the piece behind me, they all come. The majority of collections were held in France. And yeah, so that is why I pursued a degree in the art of the Russian avant-garde. It is collectively thought of by most design scholars that this is the high point of graphic design. And the reason that I usually say is because with every other art movement, like Impressionism, Baroque, any art movement you can think of, it's allowed to get shitty. Like there's a high point, then there's a drop as that movement turns into something else. With this particular type of art, it wasn't allowed to get shitty because it was made illegal at the high point. So we never get the bad stuff. So it just has that freshness today, which I think is tremendous. Were the posters designed for propaganda films more likely to actually depict or align with the film's subject matter than the posters made for other films? Great question. No. No is the short answer. Because in all cases, the designers very rarely saw the film before they made the poster. It was basically like, hey, here's a poster, here's the title, coming out tomorrow, make a poster. So the rapidity with which they had to make the posters was such that they wouldn't necessarily have seen it. And also at this point, the style is just kind of, it's not narrative. So if you look at like, where's a propaganda piece? Where's In Spring? That's like that one. Okay, so In Spring. Yeah, there's the guy at the bottom. Yeah, there is a scene in the factory. Yeah, there are some athletes, but it doesn't, I mean, there's nothing really in the film that correlates to this poster, because the first 20 minutes are you watching snow melt and like spring coming. But yeah, no, there wasn't a massive correlation. How long did it take to prepare this poster show, and what was the process? Oh, interesting. So for most museum exhibitions, it takes 5 years to make the show. However, in this particular instance, it was kind of an emergency. We had a show that was scheduled and we had to cancel it for a variety of reasons. And so my boss came to me and was like, okay, how can you have like 2 or 3 months? What can you write, research, and get a collection for very quickly? And I said, well, the best thing would be my dissertation because I already know the material. And I happen to know the person who owns all of them because I used to be a poster dealer and I just happened to know the guy who owned the collection I did my dissertation on. Not intended, like we met later in life and I was like, oh, you happen to own the thing I focus on. Wow. And now we're best friends. So I flew out to Las Vegas where the posters were. I went through a warehouse, like flashlight in my mouth, climbing over boxes. But I was basically writing the show not knowing which posters I would find. So it was more of a reverse engineering than we would normally do for a museum exhibition. I knew the general narrative I wanted, but I just didn't know what I would find. And the posters do all fit within like, I'm not focusing on the plot of the individual posters as much as I am on this time period, so I could write that more easily. The thing that I wasn't expecting is that in the 16 or so years since my dissertation, scholarship on Soviet art and history had changed dramatically. A lot of the books that I relied on in 2006, 2007 were no longer considered factual, because things were redacted and archives had been discovered. So a lot of what I originally thought about these pieces had changed so much that I had to actually relearn a lot of Soviet history during that time. So that was the process, not traditional process. Are there also posters for imported films produced in the countries of film's origins? Oh, yeah, yeah. So if you look at most of the best in foreign, like, posters for like posters that don't look like traditional posters, happen to be in communist countries, just because they were very like loosey-goosey with what the art department could do. Polish posters, amazing. There actually is a book by the Gallery Posteritati that shows like the American poster and then like what all the foreign releases for that movie looked like. So it'll be like Gone with the Wind, and then what Gone with the Wind looked like in Italy, in Germany, in Russia, in China, and they're all different. Only in the modern era did we start getting rules through Hollywood of like, I don't know, like Robert De Niro's face must be so big on this poster, his name must be this height. Like that now it's very formulaic of like in a contract as to how a poster has to be broken down. But back then those rules didn't exist. How many posters are in this collection from which you've drawn these examples? So the exhibition was 50, and I think it is still currently at 50 posters. The original Students Impact collection was hundreds, but when Ralph DeLuca purchased it, he sold off the less important pieces and kept like the most important pieces. Sorry, I answered that question very quickly. What do I personally like to collect? Oh, well. So this is by Leonardo Cappiello. He's he's considered the father of the poster. So I really have him for like historic reasons. But the stuff in my house is all over the place. I like dark and moody things. So I have like rare Italian posters for Bitter Campari that are all like sexy and romantic. I have, here you can see, I got like, that's for a German like grill. That's for a Swiss buffet. I bought it because it looks like my dad. Like I buy posters for weird reasons. I don't buy them. I'm not like the person that has to have every poster with a goose in it. I buy things that I like, and I always tell people that they should collect what you like. Don't like try to get like every Jackson Pollock. Like just buy what you like. So I'm not building an important collection. I'm building a fun collection. What other poster shows does Poster House offer, and what's the most popular show? So this Soviet show was the most popular show we ever did. And I think it was just very timely because for many reasons. And what else do we, so right now we have a show on the history of Air India. So Air India, the airline, their posters, which are like the golden age of travel. So 1960s, 1970s, very like ba-da-ba-da-ba, Mad Men. It's the first non-Western mascot that was kind of embraced globally. We've done shows on Alphonse Mucha, so that's the Art Nouveau designer. I've done a show on the Swiss grid, so like post-war Swiss design. It's like very clean, very black and white, very crisp. I'm doing a show next year in the fall on the history of Art Deco, so 1920s advertising, but globally, not just French. We are doing a show on the history of environmental activism. We're doing a show on the branding of the Black Panther Party. So we try to like really run the gamut of what is expressed through advertising posters. What do I enjoy the most in my profession? Oh, I mean, like I'm a big history nerd. I like discovering new ways of looking at history through ephemera. So like if you're reading a history book, you're reading about like major battles in World War II, like things that affected people on a global scale. If you're looking at ephemera like playbills, ticket stubs, posters, you're learning about things that didn't make it into a history book, like a band that played in the town for one night only, a product that was only available for like 6 months in Germany between the wars, like these little things. But those little things are what give a lot of like texture to people's lives. So you get a more you get a more real sense of how people lived through ephemera than I think you do reading like a general history book. And that's what I love. I love creating those narratives. Were the Soviet posters ever used when the films were sent to foreign markets? Oh, so like you're asking of like if this poster for In Spring followed the movie if it went to like the United States? No, these posters were not really posters. Do you know how expensive it would be to ship heavy, like thousands of sheets of paper? It's like real expensive. They were printed locally. They were hung locally. There were examples that we saw, like one poster or one movie was advertised clearly, like one was in Moscow and then there was another one of the same poster that was printed somewhere in Georgia, but they the printing, like the inks were just a slightly different color because they only had like that shade of purple that day. And so like there would be, and the text like had some Arabic script in it now because Turkish was spoken in that particular town. So they would have like little variations within the Soviet Union, but the posters never left the Soviet Union. Similar to how like our posters wouldn't have made it into the Soviet Union. Do you know the story how the posters in the show were actually collected? Okay, so the Susan Pack collection, slightly controversial, especially because I'm pretty sure she's still alive. So after the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of Westerners went in as journalists and also just as tourists, and the Soviet Union needed, or the former Soviet Union needed money. And so this woman, Susan Pack, who worked for an ad agency, she saw these posters and she was like, oh, these are amazing. And I'm pretty sure that museums just sold them to her for money. That's not the official story. You can't, I don't have any, that's not fact-based, but realistically, who else would have these? These would have been collected by museums. There would not have been private collections of these. And I think she gathered them from various graphic design collections who needed money. Anything else? I had one poster made by a woman designer. Are there any other posters in the collection made by women? So that wasn't a poster by a woman designer. The film was directed by a woman. I know I forget which one it was, but I think it was. It was that one, maybe. I forget which one, but it was directed by a woman, not designed by a woman. In the collection, there were no female designers. There were female artists who made posters at this time. They just weren't that prolific, and we did not have access to any. But like with all things, like women are underrepresented in the arts. So I mean, I wasn't expected to find a proliferation of women. I was interested to find that there were actually a lot of female directors and also female like editors, writers, costume makers. Like the women were very much involved in the film industry, just not on the poster end. When did Western collectors start recognizing the artistic value of these posters? After the fall of the Soviet Union. Nobody saw these until then. They never left the country. The Westerners did not know about these. Someone was like, "Oh, Andy Warhol was clearly inspired." Oh, no, he wasn't. He never saw these. These were not something that was a known thing until the 90s by the West. And that's amazing. Like this, which I think also allows us to have this, like, oh my God, they're so fresh. Like they are fresh because like we also weren't exposed to them. They weren't in art history books that much prior to then. Have you ever tried using the printing techniques of the 1920s myself? No, mostly because I don't have a lithographic press. So the methods that a lot of these posters were made, some of them still exist today. Still lithography you can get, but very, very hard to find. You have to go to a very specialized place for that. Zinc lithography is totally possible, but again, these are big machines. These aren't like a pack and play that I can do myself. It's not like silkscreen. But typesetting, I've done typesetting both with wood and metal type. I'm like a color separation I can do. It's printing methods evolve very quickly, so they become obsolete just as quickly. So how they made things then is just not really possible now. And also because they were using at this time they were using stuff that was broken. And so they were like jerry rigging them themselves, like when you put like a book underneath your table to make it stop wobbling. They would do that they would be very creative with like what they were throwing in to make it do something. And we don't know what those things were that they did. So in many cases, we were just like kind of guessing how some of these things were printed. If there are no more questions, I can let you all go free. What is my message to Russian filmmakers and artists of today? Oh, that's a complicated question. I mean, I guess whenever if there are ever any restrictions on your craft, whatever it is, but even if you're a graphic designer, you don't necessarily get to make whatever you want because you're given a brief. And like you must advertise, you have to sell pizza or whatever it is. Like you're given like parameters to work within. Never think of restrictions as restrictions. Find a way to there's always a way to take a restriction and make it an advantage. And every good designer or artist or actor or director, creative, whatever, you can always do something with limitations and show off how amazing you are. Because if you're amazing, you're going to be amazing no matter what. So don't think of restrictions as impediments to your process. But anyway, since now this talk is over, I'd like to thank the American Center in Moscow and the Forum for Cultural Engagement for having me today. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more about the museum, we're posterhouse.org. You can find me on Instagram. I'm very, very Instagram followable. And I hope you all have a lovely evening. Bye, everyone.